Sophia Loren was simply Italian. That was a story. Open her memoir, yesterday, today, tomorrow, and another identity appears beneath the name that crossed cinema screens. Sophia Costanza Brigida Villani Ciccolone. The book is the first artifact in this investigation, a physical object carrying the name she was born with in Rome in 1934, before magazines shortened her history into a single word, and before producers transformed Ciccolone into Loren. There is no verified public record of Sophia Loren releasing a personal ancestry test, a mitochondrial sequence, or a family haplogroup. That limit matters. This is not a story about taking possession of a living woman's DNA, nor about disturbing the privacy of her sons, grandchildren, or extended family. It is about what documented genealogy and population genetics can responsibly tell us about the Mediterranean world from which she came. The familiar portrait is clean: Rome by birth, Pozzuoli by upbringing, Italian by identity. But Italy is not one ancestral block, and Pozzuoli was never an isolated village. Beneath its streets lies Puteoli, a port through which people, languages, faiths, and families move for centuries. The deeper question is not whether Loren was secretly something other than Italian. It is what the word Italian conceals when it is treated as a biological endpoint. Keep two words in mind: Ciccolone and Pozzuoli. One looks like a bloodline. The other looks like a hometown. Before this investigation is finished, both will mean something more complicated. Stay with this. The record does not reduce Sophia Loren's identity. It restores the depth that fame removed from it. The official story begins in a clinic in Rome and continues in a crowded home near the Bay of Naples. Sophia was born to Romilda Villani, a piano teacher and aspiring actress, and Riccardo Ciccolone, the father who gave her his surname but not the security of a household. He did not marry Romilda. Sophia and her younger sister grew up largely within their mother's family in Pozzuoli, where poverty, wartime bombing, and the social stigma attached to birth outside marriage shaped the earliest years of Loren's life. That account is not a fabrication created after fame. Loren repeated its central facts in memoir and interview. Her father remained mostly absent. Her mother carried the practical burden. Pozzuoli became the emotional geography to which Loren returned even after Rome, Hollywood, Geneva, and the great houses of international celebrity entered the picture. When she spoke of strength, she often connected it to the southern world that formed her before anyone considered her suitable for a camera. Then the cinema renamed her. She worked for a time as Sofia Lazzaro. In the early 1950s, the less marketable Ciccolone disappeared from posters, and Sophia Loren took its place. The new name was smoother, more international, and easier for an industry that sold stars as finished objects rather than unfinished family histories. That is the accepted narrative, stated fairly. A poor Neapolitan girl became the most recognizable Italian actress in the world. She later won the Academy Award for Two Women, becoming the first performer honored in the acting categories for a non-English language performance. Her Italian identity was not invented. She defended it, acted through it, and carried Pozzuoli into roles that Hollywood could imitate but never fully reproduce. The first crack is quieter than a scandal. The word Italian sounds ancestral, yet it is primarily national and cultural. Modern genetic research shows deep structure within the peninsula, with regional differences shaped by prehistoric settlement, imperial mobility, migration, and repeated Mediterranean contact. A passport can draw a border in ink. Human ancestry rarely obeys one. The second crack lies in the family name. Ciccolone appears to promise an unbroken paternal story. Yet in Loren's childhood, a surname could represent recognition, legitimacy, and legal protection as much as biological descent. Her sister struggled to receive the paternal name, made that distinction painfully visible. The official story remains true. It is simply incomplete. The investigation turns south, toward bodies that have been silent for almost 2,000 years. Elena Pillai and an international research team were not studying Sophia Loren. They were examining the plaster casts of people killed by the eruption of Vesuvius in the year 79, testing old assumptions about biological sex, kinship, and identity. The casts have been interpreted for generations through posture, jewelry, and emotional arrangements of the bodies. The researchers entered the project to test those interpretations, not to rewrite the ancestry of a film star. What they found matters because Pompeii stood in Campania, within the same broader landscape that formed Loren's childhood. Genome-wide data from the individuals they could analyze pointed largely toward recent Eastern Mediterranean immigrant ancestry. The results also undermined familiar stories that certain victims were close biological relatives. Appearances had been turned into family narratives. DNA interrupted them. The team's discovery was accidental in the sense that gives historical research its strongest credibility. They were not searching for an Eastern origin. They were checking identities assigned by earlier observers. Their methods forced them to pause where the old story had moved too quickly, and the people inside the cast emerged as residents of a more cosmopolitan Roman world than the museum labels had allowed. This is the first evidence track, material and documentary identity. Loren's own family history contains a similar warning. A name can look like biology while carrying legal and emotional meanings that biology alone cannot explain. Riccardo's surname connected Sophia to a father she barely knew. Romilda's surname connected her to the household that actually raised her. Later, the professional name Loren connected her to an audience larger than either family line. None of this proves that Sophia Loren had a particular Eastern Mediterranean, Greek, Levantine, North African, or Sicilian percentage. It proves something more disciplined. The labels surrounding her were constructed at different levels. One came from paternity, one from maternal care, one from cinema, one from the nation. Each was real, but each described a different kind of belonging. The researchers at Pompeii did not discover Loren's genome. They demonstrated why physical appearance, a famous face, or a surname cannot safely substitute for genetic evidence. Their work also restored Campania to its historical setting. Not a sealed southern edge of Europe, but part of a moving Mediterranean. The archive was pointing toward layered identity. Ancient DNA was beginning to point in the same direction. The science becomes more useful when it is allowed to say less. A genome-wide study of modern Italian populations, led by Alessandro Ravian, found that Italy contains unusually strong regional genetic structure by European standards. The pattern reflects multiple ancient and historical movements, rather than a single founding population. Earlier work by Cornelia di Gaetano and colleagues had already identified measurable differentiation within the peninsula and between mainland Italy, Sicily, and Sardinia. Those findings do not divide Italians into separate races. They show gradients. Southern Italian populations sit within a Mediterranean continuum shaped by early farmers with roots in Anatolia, prehistoric European hunter-gatherers, Bronze Age step-related ancestry, and later movement across Greek, Roman, Byzantine, Arab, Norman, and other networks. The proportions vary by place, by sample, and by family. Even neighboring communities can preserve different histories because mountains, islands, ports, marriage patterns, and local isolation affect which ancestors leave the strongest genetic trace. Ancient DNA adds another layer. Research on imperial-era Rome found a major shift toward ancestry associated with the Eastern Mediterranean during the period when the city became the center of an empire. The later Pompeii study found a comparable signal among the Campanian individuals it examined. Archaeology explains why this is plausible. Puteoli, beneath modern Pozzuoli, became one of Rome's major commercial ports, tied to trade with the Eastern Mediterranean. Greek settlement, Roman colonization, merchants from abroad, enslaved people, soldiers, and mobile families all passed through the region. A skeptical geneticist would stop the story here. Sophia Loren's personal DNA has not been published. Population averages cannot be assigned to a named individual. A person may differ substantially from the regional profile around them. This is a legitimate challenge. It cannot be dismissed. The research team acknowledged it directly through its sampling limits, cautious language, and refusal to turn population similarity into individual identity. The correct response is not to force percentage onto Loren. It is to narrow the conclusion. The science cannot tell us her haplogroup. It cannot verify her father's claimed noble lineage. It cannot locate every ancestor on a map. What it can do is dismantle the idea that Southern Italian ancestry is genetically simple or historically self-contained. The boundary of the evidence is not a weakness. It protects the subject from claims the data cannot carry, and it is where the honest story begins. The two investigations now reach the same shoreline. This is where the two tracks meet. The documentary record shows a woman whose identity passed through several names: Villani, Sophia Loren. The genetic record shows a region whose population history passed through several worlds: indigenous Italian, Greek, Roman, Eastern Mediterranean, and later European and Mediterranean movements. Neither track produces a hidden nationality. Together, they show why the search for a single pure answer begins with the wrong question. Return to the first forward lock. Sophia looked like the key because it was a paternal surname. Yet the emotional family line ran through Romilda Villani, the mother who raised Sophia and pushed her toward Rome. The surname mattered, but it did not measure care, presence, culture, or memory. It described a recognized connection to Riccardo. It could not describe the long spaces in which he was absent, now returned to Pozzuoli. It looked like a modest hometown outside Naples. Beneath it stood Puteoli, a harbor through which Rome received grain, luxury goods, travelers, and communities from across the sea. Archaeological evidence also documents a Nabatean religious presence connected to merchants from farther east. The place Loren called home was built over evidence of human movement. There's another layer that Ancestry videos often miss. DNA does not certify culture. A genetic segment cannot remember a mother playing piano, a child running toward an air raid shelter, or a young actress refusing to erase the features that cameras called unsuitable. Genes travel through families, but identity is also made by language, hunger, work, injury, affection, and choice. The living present matters. Loren's children and grandchildren carry a family inheritance, but they also inherit the right not to have strangers convert probability into private fact. The same applies to the people of Campania today. Regional genetics can illuminate population history. It cannot assign an individual a secret identity without individual evidence. And there is one more detail. Modern geneticists increasingly warn that ancestry is continuous and multidimensional, not a set of sealed continental boxes. That warning changes the emotional center of the story. The search is no longer for the foreign element inside an Italian woman. It is for the many historical routes already contained within southern Italy. The payoff is therefore restrained. Loren's documented ancestry is Italian, rooted in Rome, Pozzuoli, and the name Villani and Sophia families. The deeper genetic context is Mediterranean and layered. The difference between those sentences is the difference between evidence and invention. The simplification did not happen by accident. It was produced by two systems that valued clean names. The first was the legal and social order surrounding children born outside marriage. In the Italy of Loren's childhood, paternal recognition could determine whether a child possessed a father's surname and the protection attached to it. Family law has changed substantially since then, eventually moving toward equal status for children regardless of their parents' marital position. But Loren grew up before those reforms, when legitimacy was not an abstract word. It followed a child into school, paperwork, inheritance, and public judgment. Her family experienced that system directly. Sophia carried Sophia. Her sister initially did not. Loren later described money being paid so that Maria could receive the paternal surname. In that episode, a name became something negotiated before a notary, almost like property. Biology may have been present, but law controlled whether society would acknowledge it. The wound was not uncertainty about blood. It was the power another person held over public recognition. The second system was the star factory. Italian popular media first turned Sophia into Sophia Lazzaro. Film producers then turned her into Sophia Loren. The change did not erase her Italian identity, but it packaged it. The industry wanted a name that traveled easily, a face that could symbolize an entire country, and a biography simple enough to fit beneath a publicity photograph. Loren's case is not unique in its structure. It is unique in the prominence of the name attached to it. The 20th century produced countless migrants, performers, and children of complicated households whose surnames change at borders, in studios through marriage, or under legal pressure. Genealogists call some of these breaks non-paternity events, name changes, informal adoptions, or record discontinuities. Yet no single term contains the emotional reality. Population history was simplified in the same way. Schoolbook categories turned Italy into one people moving in a straight line from Rome to the modern nation. Genetics and archaeology instead show repeated settlement, mobility, and mixture. The neat national portrait was useful because nations need continuity. It became misleading only when cultural continuity was mistaken for biological uniformity. This pattern does not make identity false. It explains how identity is built. A nation gives continuity. A surname gives social placement. A stage name gives public access. DNA gives another record, but not the final one. The system preferred one name. Loren's life contains several. The story returns to the book and to the name printed inside it. Sophia Loren's achievements do not become smaller because Italian ancestry is genetically complex. 2 women remains her performance. The gold of Naples remains hers. The discipline that carried a child from wartime Pozzuoli to international cinema belonged to her, not to a haplogroup, a noble title, or a laboratory category. An ancestry investigation that treats the artist as a specimen has misunderstood both the science and the art. What remains is a more human picture. Sophia inherited a paternal surname from a man who was mostly absent. She inherited endurance, language, memory, and daily care from the maternal household that raised her. She later accepted a professional name created for the screen and made it so completely her own that it now sounds more authentic than the names from which it was built. Around that family story lies another inheritance. Campania was shaped by movement long before the modern nation existed. Greek settlements rose along the coast. Roman Puteoli opened itself to the traffic of an empire. People arrived from the eastern Mediterranean and elsewhere, formed households, left descendants, disappeared from written records, and remained in the biological history of the region in patterns that modern researchers can only partially reconstruct. The sea did not separate these populations as neatly as modern maps suggest. For long periods, it connected them, but partial is the important word. No responsible study allows us to announce Sophia Loren's personal ancestry percentages. No public genetic result gives us permission to assign her an unsuspected ethnic identity. The most defensible conclusion is less theatrical and more enduring. The Italian world she embodied was never genetically singular, and the face celebrated as purely Italian came from a country whose deepest continuity is mixture. The memoir still sits open. Sophia Costan's Brigida Villani Ciccolone remains on the page. Villani remembers a maternal family. Ciccolone remembers recognition, distance, and a paternal line not fully documented in public. Loren remembers a cinema, where an invented name became a real legacy. The book preserves all the names together, without demanding that one erase the others. The legal name, the family name, and the public name occupy the same life without becoming interchangeable. DNA can describe migrations. Archives can preserve names. Neither can measure the exact inheritance of absence, ambition, or belonging. When all the tests are finished and all the records are closed, which of her names contains the truest ancestry?